Tuivu with our next question to Congressman Honda.
Congressman Honda, there's a persistent wage gap in this country. Women still make 77 cents for every dollar earned by a man. The federal government is in the process of requiring federal contractors to report aggregate compensation data. Does that go far enough, or do you think individual salaries should be reported as well? And what would you do to help close the wage gap?
One of the things I've done just to start it off is that voted with our leader, Nancy Pelosi, that we made certain that people understood the Lilly Ledbetter issue where she was not being paid equally for equal work, and she had to sue for it. And that's why I signed on and worked with Senator Mikulski of Maryland, where she has a bill that will make sure that federal contracts will close all the loopholes that deny equal pay for equal work, and also extend the timeline for suing a company if a woman finds out that she's been shortchanged. Those are the kinds of things we need to look at first, and then work towards pay equity. And the concept of equal pay for equal work has to take hold. This disparity between genders has got to stop. And I think that the way we're going to be able to do this is to keep pounding away and making sure that people understand pay equity is a necessary thing. I think more and more people are saying, middle-class people are saying, I work harder, I work longer, I work more efficiently, but I don't seem to be getting ahead. It's because we're not looking at the wealth that efficiency and technology has given us, and we haven't shared that wealth that efficiency and technology has created with the people who create the wealth. And we have to revisit that whole aspect and do something about it.
Mr. Khanna, your response, what would you bring to the table if elected?
I support the Equal Pay Act, but one of the things I'm proudest of in this campaign is our Women in the Workplace agenda. It's not enough to just have equal pay. We need to have paid parental leave. Men need to take as much responsibility as women for child rearing, and other countries, Scandinavian countries, have that. Second, we need child care tax credits so that women don't have to choose between leading in companies or their families. But you know what? I didn't come up with these ideas. I got these ideas listening to constituents, doing town halls. You know, I like the congressman. I admire him. His campaign even has all these videos out saying I like him. But you know, one of the things that I'm so disappointed in is if there's one thing in this campaign, it's that your handlers aren't letting you do town halls. I've done more town halls in the last 2 months than the congressman has done in the entire term. And this is the basic. There's so many smart, brilliant people in this district, and we have to listen to them. These debates aren't just academic. And when Congressman Honda started out, that's how he was like.
We have a chance for a follow-up question from Tuivu.
I just wanted the first part of my question to be answered. Congressman Honda, a number of women's groups feel that aggregate reporting of compensation data is not good enough, that you really can't know the true differences until individual salaries are reported. Is that something that you think the federal government should require contractors to do?
Yeah, we should be able to do that, and it's probably is public record, and I think that we can work on that and make sure that if you don't know what it is, that you can't identify the culprits. So if we do that, it can be done, and we can move forward on, and then put added pressure on those who say, you know, they're in concert with having equal pay for equal work. The answer is yes, we can do that.
Well, so many of us have Apple products, and Apple is in this district, in Cupertino, District 17, and this next issue is among the companies that would be impacted would be Apple. Melinda Jackson has that question for Congressman Honda. Oh, excuse me, for Mr. Khanna.
Mr. Khanna, what can Congress realistically do to encourage companies to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S.? And how does this apply to Silicon Valley companies like Apple, for example, which currently does the majority of its manufacturing in China?
Well, that's a great question, Professor Jackson, and it's my passion. I mean, I wrote a book about how do we bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. Didn't sell a lot of copies, but it is something I believe deeply in. And when I was at the Commerce Department, Fremont, when it was affected and the NUMMI plant was about to close, I recognized that this area needs to be an advanced manufacturing hub. And so I helped work with labor leaders, Sergio Santos, and business leaders to bring a grant back to Fremont so that Fremont wouldn't have residential housing and would actually bet on advanced manufacturing. So how do we do something, and how can we get bipartisan support? Well, there's some very simple things we should do. First, we have a skills gap. The worker of today on the factory floors, they need to be really adept. They have to understand 3D printing and robotics and customization. We have an 8 times productivity advantage over China and 1.5 over Germany and Japan. We need to partner with De Anza and Ohlone and Mission and San Jose State so that we're educating people with the skills that they're going to need in the 21st century. And we need to simplify and reform the tax code so we don't have companies like GE paying 0% tax, and we have incentives for those who are actually making things in the United States. And that would require not taking special interest money. I haven't taken a dime of it. And the reason is because I want a tax code that works for the American people, not for the Washington lobbyists.
Congressman Honda, you have 60 seconds to respond.
80% of activities here in this valley is manufacturing, and I think that we can grow that even more. And we're the #1 manufacturing center in the country on that. I've voted for, and I broke ranks with my Democratic colleagues, and voted for a permanent R&D tax credit. We've also been able to pass a bill on the floor that will also allow our manufacturing centers across this country to replicate the kinds of things that we have here on the natural. And it's called the Regional Centers for Excellence, and where we take private industry, public industry, universities, entrepreneurs, and put them all together so that they can sit down and come up with the next disruptive technology that's going to take us right into the future. That will incentivize people to stay here. And we have to also make sure that we have appropriate tax credits for consumers who will be purchasing these kinds of technologies.
On this topic, Ryan Grimm has a follow-up question. Ryan.
Mr. Khanna, you mentioned the skills gap, and a lot of CEOs in this district often do refer to this skills gap. But is it really the case that workers don't have the necessary skills, or is it that companies don't want to pay the necessary wages? In other words, there might be a shortage of engineers at $30,000 or $40,000, but if they paid what people are worth, there might be more engineers.
Paul Krugman makes this argument all the time, and I think it's complicated. If you talk to Catherine in Cupertino, she'll tell you the valley is filled with middle-aged folks of high skills, and they're not being able to get a job, not because they don't have the skills, but because there's ageism, because folks are just going to hire people who are younger. And so I don't think it's just a skill shortage. We need policies that are going to have tax credits for companies to have apprenticeship programs, to hire those who are middle-aged workers who have great skills, to bring veterans back to work. I'd love to have a longer conversation. My time's up.
Congressman Honda, next question is for you. And admirably, you've served the people in this area for decades in various capacities. Some people do fear, though, that you might be burnt out. How do you address those concerns and to those people?
I'm not burnt out, and I've got a lot of gas in this tank, and so, and I'm not even a hybrid. And I think that the kinds of energy that I use to do the kind of work comes from a very deep seated desire to make sure that this country does the right thing. I mentioned that in 42, our government had gone awry, had made mistakes. And I don't want to see that happen again to any group. And it's been one of my desires to make sure that youngsters get the voice that they need. And as a teacher, I wanted to be able to do that, to teach youngsters to speak up, to be critical consumers of goods by thinking straight and thinking critically, be able to get a powerful education so they can choose their options in the future. I don't say to youngsters, get an education for a job. Get an education, you have greater options in your career, in your life. And so the energy that really I dip into is from the people that I look at and the people that I want to help, and also not ever wanting to see a community set aside and have a constitutional guarantee set aside solely because they look different or they look like the enemy. That will never happen in my watch.
Mr. Khanna, your response.
I don't think the congressman's burnt out, and anyone has to admire his life story and to dedicate his life to politics, public service after what he went through. I think is admirable. But this question is about what we need in the future. And my argument, the reason I decided to run, and acknowledging that the congressman has opened many doors for Asian Americans around the country, is who is going to solve the issues for this district and lead at this moment in time in a complex economy. And my belief is, in a Republican-controlled, unfortunately, Congress, we're going to need someone who's going to be able to influence that debate. Mercury News has said the congressman is no longer relevant in influencing that debate. The earmark system that he relied on is no longer there. And, you know, this is what great democracies are about, that someone carries the ball and then they hand it off, and someone else goes and carries the ball, and that's what makes our country move forward.
Thank you. Our next question goes to Ryan Grimm, our lead panelist from the Huffington Post.
All right, Mr. Khanna, much of Congress agrees that the corporate tax code needs to be reformed. You and others have suggested that lowering the overall rate, but at the same time closing loopholes to simplify the code while raising the same amount of revenue. Many argue that corporations are gaming the system and paying nowhere near their fair share, often close to 0%. So wouldn't tax reform that kept revenue levels the same be like solving the problem of bank robbery by simply legalizing it? Or should corporate tax reform raise additional revenue so that big companies are paying more than they do today?
It should raise additional revenue, but the reason for corporate tax reform isn't just a revenue issue. It's a competitiveness issue. The problem right now is you have the special interests on these tax codes where some companies are paying 0%. Some companies are being incentivized to go offshore, and small businesses or entrepreneurs who want to set up shop here, the tax code is actually penalizing them. But this is not just in a matter of understanding the economics. There are plenty of smart economists, and so why does corporate tax reform not get done? It's not because there are not enough smart people in Washington. The reason is because they're all bought and sold by lobbyists. That's the reality. They're bought and sold by corporate PACs, by lobbyists who write these exemptions into the tax code. And that's why I said I wanted to try something different. I was inspired by Larry Lessig, who I did research for, and I took a pledge when I started this campaign that I would not take a single dollar from a lobbyist, not a single dollar from a PAC. You know, my campaign chair was in D.C. He said, why do you want the job? You're not going to be very popular. You're going to want to come back when you get there. But the reality is we got to try something different. People say, Ro, you're going to be naive. You're going to be swallowed alive when you get there. Well, it's time that we get the special interests out. Silicon Valley needs to take a stand, and that's the only way we're going to get meaningful corporate tax reform.
Congressman Honda, stage is yours.
Well, corporate tax reform is a necessity. It has to be comprehensive, it has to be fair, and it has to be understandable. And it is about acquiring and gathering more revenue for the federal government so that we can support the kinds of obligations that we have in this country. I think that when we say we want this reform, this taxes have to be returned and shared from overseas with our folks and be able to be part of a larger picture where we can apply these kinds of revenues to national infrastructure, to local infrastructure, to make sure that people are getting a fair living wage and making sure that the middle class becomes more vibrant and that we take care of them. And I'm not saying that, you know, corporate leaders and shareholders should not get rich. I just think that they don't have to get rich that quickly and not share it with those who create the wealth, and that's fair.
Okay, well, we are in the Silicon Valley, and we are partnering also with Facebook. We've gotten a few questions from Facebook in regards to this debate, and this one will go to Congressman Honda. And we want to appreciate and thank everyone at Facebook on our site for submitting hundreds of questions. We appreciate that. We picked this one from one of our Facebook followers, Derek Lynn, for Congressman Honda. What is your stand on the recent demonstrations taking place in Hong Kong?
I think that it's a phenomenon that was coming all along because the people of Hong Kong had lived under a British rule that said that, you know, you make your own decisions and it's more of a democracy. And when it became absorbed into PRC, it was a matter of time before these kinds of things starts to mix and start to rise above to the surface. And I think it has. I think that the United States has a role in facilitating with Hong Kong, with the youngsters there, and with the people of Hong Kong and their government leaders, along with PRC too, to sort of facilitate this progress towards a more democratic society. It doesn't have to be the same kind that we have, but certainly the people in that part of the world want to have more self-determination. They want to be able to live a life that's not intrusive, less oversight, less government restrictions. And we, on the other hand, we have the same kinds of issues too. So we should be able to feel some compassion and some understanding that there's young people, they're shrugging their shoulders and said, we can do better and we want more.
And do you genuinely believe PRC, the People's Republic of China, will budge on their stance as it is right now?
Look, in the 5,000 years, they moved a long ways. And since the revolution, they have, we've seen China become our partners, as well as folks that we have to keep an eye on. But, you know, our attitudes have gone a long ways with China.
Mr. Khanna, your response to the Facebook question regarding your thoughts about what's happening in Hong Kong.
Well, I'm very sympathetic to the demonstrators who are marching for peace, for human rights, for democracy. You know, my values actually, you know, while I'm very proud of the entrepreneurs and all that are supporting me, my values really come from my grandfather, Amarnath Vidyalankar. He spent 4 years in jail during Gandhi's independence movement, fighting for human rights and freedom. And one of the remarkable things about our district is we've got people from around the world, from India and Pakistan and China and Vietnam, Philippines. And we have the shot to shape from this district a world that's not going to make the mistakes of the 20th century, not be bogged down in that Cold War thinking or communism versus democracy, but to stand up for human rights, to stand up for democracy promotion, to stand up for a more integrated world. That's why leadership from this district is perhaps the most important district in the entire country.
Thank you. For our panelists, we have just a few more questions here, so we will jump around just to get to some topics that I want to address before our time expires. So with that said, let's bring in Thuy Vu from KQED regarding the recent Vergara decision in education.
And will this just be
this is for Mr. Khanna.
Okay. Mr. Khanna, the landmark Vergara decision in California last June denounced the state's tenure and teacher layoff system as a violation of students' constitutional rights. The ruling is having a ripple effect nationwide. Do you think current tenure and layoff policies protect bad teachers, and what would you do to address that?
Well, this is where we have an honest disagreement, Congressman Honda and I. I supported the Vergara decision. The congressman took to writing an op-ed in the Hill saying it puts students at war with teachers. My view on this is let's tone down the rhetoric. You know, I mean, my mom was a substitute school teacher. I love and respect teachers. I teach at, not a teacher, I teach at Santa Clara and Stanford. I've talked to so many teachers in this district. Michelle Cosgrove and Cheryl Cook-Calio are probably watching and teaching in Fremont. And we need to bring the stakeholders to the table. And here's what I would do. First, respect teachers more. In other cultures, teachers are treated with extraordinary amount of respect. We don't do that in this country. Second, pay teachers more. There's no reason that lawyers or doctors or others should be making more money than a great teacher. Third, require basic credentialing in the subject matter. Require someone teaching calculus to actually understand or have a master's degree in calculus. And then fourth is have some accountability. And people say, well, you can't evaluate teachers, and you can't on test scores, but a comprehensive evaluation makes sense. The good teachers want it because the good teachers don't want ineffective teachers in the classroom, just like politicians don't want bad politicians because that gives every politician a bad name. Let's work in a collaborative fashion to do what's right by students and take the politics out of this.
Congressman Honda, your opportunity to respond, and as you know, the teachers union was against this. What's your response to the question?
Well, the fact is that the Supreme Court said there's 5 sections of the Ed Code that prohibits due process for teachers in terms of assessment, retention, and evaluation. And I think that those are the important things that teachers really want. They want a good assessment and retention process so that teachers who need to leave or find another job can do that. This is not a war against students and teachers. This is a tweaking of Ed Code that needed to be tweaked a long time ago. So this is an opportunity for us to be able to compose a straightforward Ed Code that will allow due process for teachers and also afford good instructors for our kids. It's an opportunity, and I think we should take that.
Our last question of the evening for the question for us, it comes from Melinda Jackson from San Jose State for Congressman Honda. And Melissa, if you want to do the approval of Congress, if you don't mind.
Congressman Honda, a recent field poll found that 75% of California voters disapproved of the job Congress is doing. Why do you think the public holds such a dim view of Congress right now? And why would you want to be reelected to such an unpopular group? Also, if reelected, what would you do to try to improve the public trust and confidence in Congress?
75% are judging their sense because of the word Congress. If we were able to disaggregate the word Congress into the different parties and how people voted so that they understand that one word doesn't paint each and every congressperson with the same brush, I think their feelings would be a little bit different. Because when they say, how do you like your current congressperson? Well, that's a different story. I think the way we report things has to be a little bit more disaggregated. I don't take a dim view about Congress. I think Congress is a wonderful opportunity, especially for me. It's the job that I can take all my experiences and put it right into policy making where I can see gaps in policy and fill it, anticipate needs and fill that, and work with people to make sure that the policies that we have in this country are 100% focused and they're really accurate and that they hit the points that we need to hit. And what would I do when I go back to make a difference? I think that it was called town hall meetings. In Silicon Valley, the word reinvent. I reinvented myself from town hall meetings. I had over 5 telephone town hall meetings where I reached thousands of people at once. And at the end of the hour, we end up with 300 to 600 people. I think that's a good way to connect with people and be present with them using technology.
Mr. Khanna, your response, the dim view of Congress was the initial question.
Well, I appreciate that, Professor Jackson. The question, when I've knocked on 5,000 doors, and I don't think that takes the place of Facebook or electronic communications that I get asked, is not why am I better than Congressman Honda? It's why in the hell, why do I want the job? And the reality is, Congressman Honda started his career, I think, with the greatest of intentions. But he has become a part of the problem. And the frustration, people want 50, 100 new members of Congress. They want to hit reset because they want folks who are, A, going to be effective, who are not just going to pass one bill in 14 years of naming a post office and will actually get Republican co-sponsors when they introduce legislation. They want someone who's going to work as hard as they are, who's going to, for me, getting to Congress is an extraordinary privilege and won't be missing the second most attendance votes. And they want someone who's going to be answerable every month to real life questions, tough questions. That's how the congressman was when he started. That's how I'll be from day one when I get there.
Well, Congressman Honda and Mr. Khanna, thank you for both for your thoughtful responses this evening. As we come to a close, this is your final opportunity for your closing remarks, and we will begin your closing statements. You have 2 minutes for each of you. We'll begin with Mr. Khanna.
Well, thank you, Raj. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Congressman Honda for participating. When I grew up as the son of immigrants, went to public school, my parents told me that if I worked hard, made good grades, I'd have a job. I'd have great opportunities. And in this campaign, one of the things I'm proud of is I've gone to almost every high school in the district. Monte Vista, Milpitas, Irvington. And I ask kids, them, are you concerned about getting a job when you graduate? You know what? 80% of kids raise their hand. For the first time in our country's history, there's a question. Is the American dream going to be alive for the next generation. And at this time, unfortunately, we have a Washington politics that seems so disconnected, a Congress that is broken. You know, despite the low approval ratings, The Economist had an article that said that the turnover rate in the United States Congress is less than European monarchy families. We fought a revolution over this. These things weren't supposed to be lifetime estates. Thomas Jefferson said members of Congress ought to return to their communities and live under the laws they pass. Tonight, I ask not just for your vote. I ask you to join our campaign for change. We want to invigorate our politics with new ideas, with new vision. We want to bring something different because we've gotten so far astray from our founding ideals. I want to work to help make the American dream possible for the next generation, the dream that inspired my parents to immigrate to this country in the 1960s. Thank you.
Congressman Honda, you have 2 minutes for your closing statements.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank you, Raj, the panelists. I want to thank NBC and our audience here and the viewership. I want to thank them for tuning in on to us rather than Monday Night Football. And I think that I would like to leave this impression that my history and my experience is the pattern of the way I work, think, and behave. In 1942, I said before, my government, our government turned our backs on us. There was nobody that stood up and said no when they took away our constitutional rights. There was nobody that stood up and said, this is wrong. Under my watch, this will never happen. I will always speak up for those who need that voice. That passion was developed as I was growing up, and that drove me to look at serving my country through Peace Corps. In El Salvador, I spent 2 years there, learning another language, learning another culture, but I also learned about myself. I learned that the things that I experienced, I can turn that into a positive energy where youngsters can benefit from my insights so that they don't have to go through the same kind of things that I've gone through. And so I want our youngsters to be able to be critical thinkers, to be passionate about their constitutional rights and be knowledgeable about what they can do and speak up. So as a teacher and administrator for over 20 years, that was the direction I went until I hit the direct politics, elected politics. And there I took all this experience and turned that into policy making, where the policies that we have will generate that kind of behavior as a nation, as a community, as a city, as a county. And I think that that's the important thing that I want to be able to share with people out there. The direct politics has been impacting me, and I would be very, very humble and appreciative of your vote and your support.
Mr. Khanna, Congressman Honda, I think I speak for a lot of people here in the studio and watching wherever they might be watching. But regardless of the outcome of the election, we appreciate your public service. Thank you. And I know we've asked our audience to hold their applause throughout this whole debate, which they've done a great job. But I think it's a good opportunity for them to thank the candidates as well. And thanks for those of you watching at home or online or even listening on the radio. We hope to see you at the polls on Election Day, November 4th, or at the post office before mailing in your ballots there. For our entire panel and everyone here at NBC Bay Area, I'm Raj Mathai. Our coverage continues after this break with our political analyst, Larry Gersten.